of Education is dismantled, what will you do to protect the students who are disadvantaged and impoverished on Title I funds?
Well, Title I funds are appropriated by Congress. They flow directly to the states today. They go to the State Department of Education.
Senator Angela Alsobrooks put Linda McMahon on the defensive after demanding a clear answer on one of the biggest questions facing America's schools. Would she carry out a Trump order to freeze education funding already approved by Congress? McMahon's repeated refusal to give a direct answer turned a routine confirmation hearing into a revealing showdown over the future of public education.
Senator Alsobrooks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just begin my remarks. Hello, thank you so much, Ms. McMahon, for being here today. And I'd like to just begin, follow up with what my colleague said and address what I regard as very disparaging comments. I'd just like to say first by one of my colleagues regarding the educators who have come here today. And in the same vein as Senator Kim, the educators who are here, my colleague referred to them as these people, and said, who would want to be taught by these people, the passionate educators who have come here today, not on behalf of themselves, they're here on behalf of our children. And I want to address how shameful it was to say who would want to be taught by them. They are exactly the kind of people who we want teaching our children. The question I have for you today, I know your parents were civil servants, and so you recognize the importance that they bring to their work, the care and concern that they bring to their work. And I have been very concerned regarding the treatment of many of our civil servants, those especially in the Department of Education. You may know that last night a number of them were laid off with 15 minutes to have their computers turned off, access to it, just treated really horribly. So the question I have for you, because one of my constituents on a town hall I hosted last night with 17,000 Marylanders said that they are working in a culture of fear at the department, and that civil servants at the department don't know who will be fired next, have little guidance, and feel like they can't do their jobs, and they care very much about the work they're doing. So how will you address the culture of fear in an environment where civil servants, both Democrats and Republicans, who are working there are feeling undervalued and attacked by this administration?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Senator. And it's always difficult to downsize. It's always difficult to restructure and reorganize in any department. I have faced that, in the business world, because you know that you do impact people's lives. But at this particular point, I know that there are people that are being placed on administrative leave, which means they are still receiving full benefits and salary while their jobs are being looked at and how the department is being evaluated overall. I think people should always be treated with respect and with humility. And I would hope that that is what is going on within the Department of Education. I'm not there in person to see that yet, but it was certainly something that I would strive to do in any reorganization that we would take.
Okay, and I'd also like to ask you regarding the president's targeting of legally binding collective bargaining agreements. He has really targeted those, to ask you whether you will commit to abiding by the agreement and upholding civil service employment protections.
I will certainly commit to working with you and to looking into those issues if I am confirmed to be the Secretary of Education.
And also to ask you whether you will commit to ensuring that federal workers with disabilities, many of them are very concerned about whether they will continue to have reasonable accommodations as required by law.
Well, as required by law is the key phrase there, yes.
Okay, well, in the same vein, there are some who are concerned about being forced now to reapply for accommodations. These are people who have had those accommodations given to them, and they're being told now that they must reapply for those accommodations with their supervisors. And so will you commit that the department civil servants with disabilities will have their reasonable accommodations honored without interference or delay?
I'll certainly commit, if I'm there and confirmed, to look into all of those and to get back to you.
Okay. And finally, I'd like to ask you regarding the freezing of funds. If you are confirmed, would you support any directive from the President to freeze funds that have been appropriated by Congress, including funds that students and families rely on to pay for college?
If they've been appropriated by Congress, those funds should be disseminated.
Okay, and so you would block any directive, you would not adhere to any directive, including some of our HBCUs in my state, Bowie, Coppin State, Morgan State, you would not interfere with the freezing of those funds?
I commit to you that I will look into every single one of those programs so that I can get back to you and say, this is what I've found, this is what I've discovered, this is what the action is being taken against it or in favor of it, because I'd want to be very inclusive with you on that regard.
Okay, the final question, I just have 9 seconds here. Title I, I know that you said
One
you
of the most
support it.
revealing
If the
exchanges of the
Department of
confirmation hearing came when Senator Angela Alsobrooks challenged Education Secretary nominee Linda McMahon over whether she would protect education funding already approved by Congress, or follow directives from Donald Trump if they conflicted with those appropriations. But before diving into policy, Alsobrooks made a point of defending the educators who attended the hearing. After another senator referred to teachers in the audience dismissively as these people and questioned who would want to be taught by them, Alsobrooks pushed back forcefully. She said those educators weren't there for themselves, they were there to advocate for America's children, and argued they represented exactly the kind of dedicated professionals the country needs in its classrooms. That opening set the tone for the rest of her questioning. Alsobrooks then shifted to the recent layoffs inside the Department of Education, describing reports from federal employees who said they had only minutes before losing access to their computers and workplaces. She shared concerns from Maryland constituents who described an atmosphere of fear, uncertainty, and confusion, with civil servants unsure whether they would be the next to lose their jobs. Rather than accusing McMahon personally, Alsobrooks asked how she would restore confidence among career employees who felt undervalued despite years of public service. McMahon acknowledged that downsizing is always difficult and said workers should be treated with respect and dignity. She also noted that some employees had been placed on administrative leave while the department underwent evaluation. But because she had not yet assumed office, she repeatedly stopped short of making firm commitments about how those employees would ultimately be treated. The questioning then broadened to civil service protections. Alsobrooks asked whether McMahon would honor collective bargaining agreements and ensure that federal employees with disabilities continued receiving the reasonable accommodations guaranteed under federal law. McMahon agreed that legal requirements must be followed but repeatedly answered that she would look into individual situations if confirmed. That careful language became a recurring theme throughout the hearing. The most significant moment arrived when Alsobrooks turned to the issue dominating education policy debates: funding. She asked a straightforward question. If Congress has already appropriated funding for schools, student aid, and programs supporting colleges and universities, including historically black colleges and universities, would McMahon refuse any directive from President Trump to freeze that money? Instead of providing a simple yes or no, McMahon answered that congressionally appropriated funds should be disseminated. But when pressed again about whether she would resist any order to freeze those funds, she stopped short of making that commitment, saying she would review each program individually before responding. That distinction became the heart of the exchange. For Democrats, the concern is that delays or freezes in congressionally approved education funding could affect students relying on financial aid, schools serving disadvantaged communities, and institutions like HBCUs that depend on predictable federal support. Alsobrooks appeared determined to secure an unequivocal promise that those funds would continue flowing regardless of political pressure. McMahon instead chose caution, emphasizing that she wanted to study each program before making final decisions. The hearing concluded with a discussion of Title I funding, which supports schools serving low-income communities. McMahon argued that because Congress appropriates Title I money and states distribute those funds, dismantling the Department of Education would not necessarily interrupt the funding stream. That response highlighted one of the broader debates surrounding proposals to shrink or eliminate the department itself. Supporters argue that many programs could continue through state governments, while critics worry that weakening federal oversight could reduce accountability and consistency in how education programs are administered nationwide. Throughout the exchange, Alsobrooks focused on accountability rather than rhetoric. She repeatedly sought definitive commitments about protecting workers, respecting federal law, and safeguarding education funding already approved by Congress. McMahon, meanwhile, consistently avoided making promises beyond saying she would examine the issues if confirmed. Whether viewers see that as careful preparation or an unwillingness to commit will likely depend on their own perspective. One thing is certain. The exchange underscored just how much is at stake for students, educators, and families as Congress debates the future role of the federal government in American education.